Why men can't forget women who master these three silent powers. She didn't try to be unforgettable, but she was. And I'll be honest, I've been with women who were stunning, perfect on paper, the kind of woman you introduce to your friends and they nod in approval, but I forgot most of them. Then there was her. She didn't wear flashy clothes, she didn't bat her eyes or laugh too loud, she didn't compete, she didn't chase, she just walked into a room like she belonged there. Not for attention, just present, and you could feel it. Like the air shifted when she walked by. I didn't know what it was at first, but something in me slowed down around her. I listened more. I wanted to understand her, not just look at her, and that's when I realized she had something rare, something I hadn't seen in a long time, maybe ever. She wasn't performing. She wasn't afraid of silence. She didn't need me to validate her, but somehow I wanted to. Not because she asked, but because of who she was, without even trying. You see, most men don't talk about this, but we don't fall for a woman's looks. Not really. We fall for how she makes us feel, safe, challenged, alive, and women like her, they hold something quiet, something powerful. There are three silent things she did that I'll never forget, and if you're a woman watching this right now, you may already have them and not even know it. And if you're a man watching, let me ask you this. What's the quietest thing a woman ever did that stayed with you longer than anything else? Think about it, then share it in the comments. I read everyone. Now, let me tell you what those three things are. The first thing I noticed about her wasn't what she said or did, it was what she didn't need. She didn't need to prove anything. Not to me, not to anyone. She wasn't trying to win the room. She wasn't trying to win me. And yet, I was drawn to her from the start. There was something about the way she carried herself, like she had nothing to prove and nothing to hide, like she knew exactly who she was and didn't need to explain it. She didn't talk herself up. She didn't list her accomplishments. She didn't drop hints about what made her special. She just was, and you could feel it. Not in a loud way, not in a showy way, but in the way she sat still, the way she looked you in the eye, the way she wasn't trying to impress, and somehow made you want to give her all your attention anyway. It's hard to describe unless you've been in the presence of a woman like that, someone who knows her, worth so deeply. She doesn't have to perform it, she just lives it. It's in how she speaks, slow, thoughtful, never rushed. It's in how she listens, not waiting for her turn to talk, but really hearing you. It's in how she can say no, without guilt, and yes, without fear. She didn't explain her boundaries, she didn't apologize for them, she didn't bend them to keep someone around. And yet, she wasn't hard, she wasn't cold or closed off. There was warmth in her, but it was protected. She had this calm air about her, like she knew life could get loud, messy, unpredictable. And she wasn't afraid of any of it. She didn't try to control the world around her, just mastered how she moved through it. And that calm, that steadiness, it was magnetic. It made me want to be slower around her, more real, more careful. Not out of fear, but out of respect, because I could sense something in her. She had earned this peace. It didn't come easy. It wasn't about being born confident. It was built, step by step, likely through pain I'd never see, and still she smiled. Easily, she spoke kindly. She didn't carry bitterness in her voice or ego in her posture. She was free. Not the kind of freedom you get from avoiding people, the kind of freedom you get when you finally accept yourself. And I'll tell you something most men won't say out loud. We don't fall for loudness or performance. We fall for this. A woman who knows what she's worth and doesn't need you to agree for her to believe it. There's a difference between someone who has value and someone who knows it. She knew it, not because she was trying to be independent. She wasn't out to prove how strong she was. She wasn't trying to be unbothered. She cared, but not at the cost of herself. That balance? That's rare. She could sit in silence without making it awkward. She could disagree without turning cold. She could be kind without making herself small. She didn't take up space to be seen. She filled space because she was whole. And in that presence, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't need to perform either. She gave me space to be honest. Not because she was trying to be a safe space. She just was. Because when someone is at home in themselves, they become a kind of home for everyone around them. I remember one evening we talked about relationships. I asked her what she looks for now, after everything she's been through. She thought for a moment, then said, "I don't want to be someone's project. I don't want to be someone's escape. I just want to be met as I am." Simple words, but they hit like truth always does. Quiet, clean, undeniable. She wasn't looking for someone to complete her. She wasn't looking to complete anyone either. She wanted connection, but not at the cost of self, and that, to me, is what real confidence looks like. It's not loud, it's not polished, it's not about being the smartest or most successful or most desired. It's knowing who you are and being willing to stand in that fully, even if it means standing alone sometimes. She didn't fear being alone. She feared losing herself, and that difference, it made all the difference. Because in a world where everyone's trying to be more, she was fully herself, and that made her unforgettable. But maybe what pulled me in even deeper was something softer than confidence, something more hidden, but just as powerful. It was the way she could be close, without clinging. She didn't need me, and that's exactly why I wanted to be close. To her, there's a kind of woman who quietly lets you know, "I've already made peace with myself. You're welcome to join me. But I'm not waiting to be saved." That was her. She had built something beautiful inside of her long before I ever showed up. A life, a rhythm, a sense of peace that didn't depend on anyone else showing up perfectly. And I remember the moment I really saw it. We had just spent a weekend together. It had been easy, warm, real. But on Sunday night, I said something offhanded, nothing cruel, just careless. I was distracted, tired, and I made a comment that brushed too close to something personal she'd shared earlier. The room went quiet. I braced myself. I'd seen this moment before in other relationships. I expected distance, coldness, or a quiet punishment, days of silence, withdrawal, guilt, but she didn't do any of that. She just looked at me, steady, soft, and said, "That didn't feel good. I know it probably wasn't meant that way, but I need to say it. No drama, no lecture, no emotional collapse. She didn't need me to fix it right there. She didn't expect me to read her mind. She gave me clarity instead of confusion. And in that moment, I realized something. She could be hurt and still stay grounded, still stay kind, still stay open. That was emotional independence, not in theory, but in practice. It's easy to be composed when everything feels good, but her strength showed when things didn't go as planned. She wasn't asking me to make her whole again. She had never given me that responsibility, that kind of self-possession. It made me respect her more than I can explain. Because I've been in relationships where love came wrapped in expectation, where every disagreement turned into a test, where silence meant punishment, where connection was always just a few missteps, away from collapse. But with her, things didn't fall apart easily. She didn't come undone when I disappointed her. She simply made room for both of us to be human, and in doing that, she made it safe to come closer. You see, emotional independence isn't about being distant, it's about being centered. She didn't push me away, she welcomed me in, but not to fix, not to fill, not to carry. She invited me into a life she already enjoyed. Her joy wasn't performative. It wasn't built to impress or attract. It was personal. She lit her own candles. She took herself to the beach just because it felt good. She made her space beautiful, not for guests, but because she lived there, and that was reason enough. Being with her never felt like an obligation. It felt like being trusted with something precious. Because when someone doesn't need you, but chooses to include you anyway, you show up differently. You Slow down. You listen harder. You offer more because it's not being pulled out of you. And here's the truth most men don't say out loud. We don't want to be someone's oxygen. We just want to be their choice. She made me feel like a choice, never a crutch. She didn't wait by the phone. She didn't punish distance with silence. She didn't need constant reassurance to believe. She mattered. She knew who she was before I got there. She would still know who she was if I left. And that certainty, that quiet, calm groundedness was more attractive than any dress, any look, any game. Because when a woman no longer fears being alone, she starts loving in a different way, with freedom, with intention, without control. She gave love like an offering, not like a need. And when I gave it back, it was never because I felt obligated. It was because she created a space that made me want to show up more fully. I asked her once how she learned to be this way. She smiled, looked off into the distance and said, I used to disappear into other people. One day I just decided I wanted to know who I was, without all the noise. That hit me, because so many people confuse emotional independence with being guarded, but hers came from healing, not hardness. She had done the work, sat with her own sadness, faced her own shadows, and come out the other side with grace, not walls. And when you're in the presence of someone like that, someone who's comfortable in their own silence, someone who doesn't ask you to shrink or stretch just to be loved, you remember what real connection is supposed to feel like. Light, clear, kind, not rushed, not demanding, not driven by fear. So if you've ever wondered if men truly value women who don't chase, who don't cling, who love from fullness instead of lack, the answer is yes. We see you, we feel it, and when we're ready, we stay. Not because we have to, because we want to, because emotional independence is the quiet confidence that tells us you've already chosen yourself, and now you're choosing me too. But what stayed with me most wasn't just her strength, it was her softness. And I don't mean softness in the way the world usually defines it, pretty, pleasing, easy to be around. I mean the kind of softness that lets someone be completely real with you, without judgment. The kind of presence that makes you feel like you don't need to edit yourself. She didn't try to be impressive. She didn't try to be wise or spiritual or above it all. She just showed up as herself, messy, honest, curious, calm, and because she was honest about who she was, her fears, her dreams, her doubts, she gave me permission to be honest about mine too. There's something unbelievably attractive about someone who doesn't hide behind a version of themselves, someone who doesn't play cool or pretend to have it all figured out, someone who laughs when they're nervous, admits when they're wrong, and stays open even when the easy thing would be to shut down. That was her. I could say something vulnerable, something I'd usually hide or water down, and she'd lean in, not away. She wouldn't fix it. She wouldn't give me a motivational speech. She'd just say, I hear you. And those 3 words, they were like oxygen, because in a world where everyone's talking, competing, reacting, she listened, not just to my words, to what I didn't say, to the pause between sentences, to the way my tone changed when I was pretending to be okay. She noticed without making it a spectacle, and that made me feel more seen than I had in years. It's a strange thing, being really listened to. Most people don't realize how rare it is. We're used to conversations that are half waiting, half performing, where one person is talking and the other is preparing their reply. But with her, there was no rush. She let silence exist. She let stories unfold. She didn't interrupt. She didn't steer things back to herself. She just held space, like she understood that sometimes the best thing you can offer someone is not a solution, but a place to land. And I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone, not because she asked, but because her presence made it feel safe to go deeper. I once asked her how she learned to listen that way. She smiled, shrugged and said, because for a long time no one really listened to me, and I promised myself I'd do it differently. That hit me harder than I expected, because I think many women, especially as they get older, feel unseen, talked over, talked past, forgotten, but she had turned that ache into a gift. She knew what it felt like to be invisible. So she chose to make others feel visible, and in doing that, she became unforgettable herself. She didn't speak to be heard. She spoke to connect, and when she listened, it wasn't to gather information. It was to understand who I was underneath all my roles, underneath the man, the provider, the protector. And for a man, that's the most healing thing in the world, to be heard not just for what you do, but for what you feel. She never tried to fix my pain. She just made space for it. And in that space, I found parts of myself I didn't even know were waiting to come out. She made me feel like I wasn't a problem to solve. I was a person to meet, layer by layer, story by story. And here's the beautiful part. I started doing the same for her. I began listening differently. I started paying attention, not to be polite, but to really know her, her favorite scent, the way her voice changed when she talked about her dad, the quiet hesitation in her laugh when she wasn't sure she was being taken seriously. She brought out a better version of me, not because she asked, but because she led with who she truly was, and the more she showed me her real self, the more I wanted to protect it, not in a possessive way, in a respectful way, because you don't get honesty like that every day. You don't get presence like that twice. She reminded me that the real magic isn't in the loudest connection, it's in the quietest one, the kind, where you don't have to raise your voice to be heard, where you don't have to beg for closeness, where two people show up as they are, no masks, no performances, and say, "This is me. I'm not perfect, but I'm here." And somehow that's more romantic than any perfect date, any grand gesture, any game of playing hard to get. So if you're wondering what makes a woman unforgettable, it's not the way she looks, it's the way she makes you feel, when you can finally stop pretending. If you've made it this far, maybe something in these words touched something in you. Maybe you've known a woman like this. Maybe you are a woman like this. If you are, I want you to know you're not invisible. You're not forgotten. You're not too much. And you don't need to become someone else to be loved. Just as you are, whole, imperfect, beautifully real, you are more than enough. And if you're a man watching this, tell me in the comments, what's the quietest thing a woman ever did that stayed with you forever? I read every word. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to follow, because we're just getting started. There's so much more I want to say about love, about aging with grace, about being seen, and finally, about choosing yourself again.